A settler could own a stout wagon, healthy oxen, and enough flour to reach Oregon, and still lose everything through one bad decision. Cross a creek at the wrong hour, balance a mule pack poorly, push the team too hard during the first week, or let frightened animals run past the bell mare. And the journey could end hundreds of miles from help. In 1859, Army Captain Randolph Marcy put the hard-earned rules of overland survival into a government-authorized manual. These are 12 of the skills American settlers once needed before they ever reached the land they hoped to call home. Number 12. Building strength before the hard country. The first survival skill on our list was knowing when not to push. Families often began an overland journey on good grass, level roads, and abundant water. That easy country created a dangerous temptation. The wagons were fresh, the animals looked strong, and everyone wanted to cover miles. Some teams came straight from grain feeding into grass-powered labor. Inexperienced drivers urged them forward before their muscles, shoulders, digestion, and hooves had adapted to daily work. Marcy warned that overworking cattle at the beginning caused more suffering and disaster than almost any other mistake. His recommendation was deliberate. Start with short, easy drives. Keep the animals at a walk. Rest during the hottest part of the day. Let them graze whenever grass and water were available. 16 or 18 miles completed without injury was worth more than a heroic day that weakened the team. The counterintuitive part was that the easy eastern country was where strength had to be saved. A fast opening week could impress the other wagons while quietly borrowing from the team's future. The mountains, deserts, alkali flats, and waterless stretches still lay ahead. A team that arrived there already worn down could not be repaired like a wagon wheel. Settlers survived by treating animal strength as stored capital. They spent it only when terrain or water forced them to. Number 11. Crossing the stream before camping. A creek at sunset looked like an invitation to stop. It offered water for the family, grass for the animals, and a natural place to wash dust from hands and faces. But experienced travelers followed an old frontier rule. If the route crossed that stream, cross it before making camp. The reason was simple. A storm could fall miles upstream during the night, completely beyond the view of the camp. The family might wake to a brown, swollen current where an easy ford had been the evening before. Now the wagons were trapped on the wrong bank. They could wait several days for the water to fall, consuming food and forage while the season moved against them. This rule demanded effort at the exact moment everyone was tired. The team had to be hitched again. The ford had to be checked. The wagons had to pass before supper and sleep. Yet one final crossing could protect the entire schedule. It also placed the family on the correct bank before darkness, when a misjudged ford became more dangerous. On the trail, timing was part of survival. A shallow stream was not merely water, it was a gate, and settlers learned to get through while it was still open. Number 10. Making an emergency rawhide shoe. Oxen did not need to be attacked or injured in an accident to become useless. Hundreds of miles of stone, baked ground, and wagon ruts could wear their hooves down until every step caused pain. Once an ox went lame, the family lost part of its engine. The remaining animals inherited more weight, which could begin a chain of failure through the whole team. Marcy described wrapping a thick piece of rawhide around the worn foot and tying it firmly to the leg. The rawhide became a temporary shoe. It protected the tender hoof well enough to keep the animal moving until the party reached better ground or could make a lasting repair. There was one weakness: rain. Wet rawhide softened and wore through quickly. The same material that made tough tethers, harness repairs, lashings, and containers could fail under a soaked hoof. That meant the driver had to read both the animal and the weather. The skill was not merely tying leather around a foot. Rawhide had to resist abrasion, stay firmly in place, and be watched so the binding did not create another injury. It was recognizing lameness early, unloading weight when possible, applying the shoe before the hoof worsened, and understanding that the repair bought distance, not permanence. So far, every decision has protected the animals that moved the household west. But what happened when 200 frightened mules broke at once? Or when the road ahead contained nearly 80 miles without a drop of water? The next skills turned animal behavior and travel timing into tools as important as rope or iron. Number 9. Turning a stampede with the bell mare. A stampede could destroy an expedition without breaking a single wagon. Horses and mules might bolt from a wolf, a sudden noise, a nighttime storm, or simple panic. Once they ran into open country, the family could lose transportation, saddle animals, pack animals, and months of work in a few minutes. Marcy had seen a herd of roughly 200 scatter so widely that recovery took several days. Experienced mule trains kept a quiet mare wearing a bell. The mules formed an intense attachment to this animal, called the madrina. They followed her on the road, entered rivers after her, and gathered when they heard her bell. Marcy wrote that when a herd took fright, a herdsman could ride the bell mare ahead of it, gradually turn her toward camp, and slow her as familiar wagons came into sight. The method did not overpower the herd. In the midst of panic, it gave something familiar to follow. That was why experienced herders kept good horses saddled and ready at night rather than waiting to catch and bridle them after the animals had already broken. That is what makes it so remarkable. The strongest control in the train was not a whip, a fence, or a rider shouting orders. It was attachment. Settlers who understood their animals could redirect hundreds of running hooves with one trusted mare moving in the right direction. Number 8. Balancing a pack to save the animal. Packing a mule was not simply a matter of tying cargo to both sides. The two packages had to be nearly identical in weight and as close as possible in bulk. If one side hung heavier, the saddle shifted. If one bundle protruded farther, it pulled differently with every step. Over miles of rough ground, a small imbalance became an open wound beneath the saddle. And a wounded pack animal might be useless even though its legs and hooves remained sound. The correct method began before the mule was loaded. The cargo was divided and weighed by judgment. Ropes were looped to equal length. Two people lifted the bundles at the same time from opposite sides. Then the lashing was drawn tight in repeated diagonal turns. Anything that could rattle had to be secured because a frightened mule carrying a shifting load could wreck the entire pack. The ropes were tightened whenever the load settled, sometimes by twisting them with a short stick. Marcy considered about 125 pounds enough for a mule on a long journey, far below the crushing load some commercial muleteers demanded. The lesson was practical and severe. An animal can carry a burden that slowly destroys it. A good packer noticed rubbing hair, heat, swelling, loosened rope, and unequal sway before blood appeared. Survival depended on preserving the back beneath the load. Number 7. Crossing 78 miles without water. The Spanish word was jornada, a long drive between dependable water. Some covered 50 or 60 miles. The Jornada del Muerto in New Mexico stretched roughly 78.5 miles, and in a dry season it offered no water at all. There was no convenient midpoint where a tired team could be rescued by a spring. Marcy's method began at the final camp. Animals rested on the best available grass and drank as much as they wanted. Water kegs were filled. The team was watered again immediately before departure. Then the wagons moved during the cooler night. Every 2 hours came a brief rest. At daylight, the animals grazed, especially if dew remained on the grass. They halted again during oppressive heat and resumed in late afternoon. The skill was a schedule built around thirst. Settlers did not wait for the animals to weaken before conserving them. They entered the dry country fully rested, traveled when evaporation and heat were lower, and used every patch of grass as moisture and fuel. A journey that looked impossible on a clock became possible when broken into the right sequence of drinking, darkness, grazing, and rest. The system assumed firm ground. Deep sand could erase the advantage by multiplying the effort required from every animal. Number 6. Building a litter from poles and a blanket. A broken leg, fever, deep cut, or infected wound created a brutal problem. A sick person might be unable to walk or sit a horse, while the nearest settlement remained days away. Leaving the injured behind was unthinkable. Stopping the whole party could expose everyone to weather, hunger, or an approaching winter. A wagon train needed a plan for injured people as surely as it needed wagon parts. Marcy described 2 improvised stretchers, simple pole frames used to carry someone who could not walk. For animals to carry, 2 long poles were joined with cross pieces and a blanket, stout canvas or hide stretched between them. One steady horse or mule traveled at the front and another at the rear. The flex of the long poles softened the motion, making the ride more tolerable than a rigid platform jolting over every rut. When no animals were available, shorter poles, 3 cross pieces, and a blanket formed a hand litter carried by 2 people. The center cross piece served an unexpected purpose. The patient was positioned beneath it, so the bar helped prevent a fall. Small windows could be bent over the frame and covered to make shade or rain protection. This was frontier first aid before treatment even began. Build a safe way to move the patient, control the motion, and keep one injury from becoming 2. Number 5. Swelling a loose wagon wheel back together. Prairie air attacked wagons quietly. Dryness pulled moisture from the wooden wheels. The curved wooden sections around the wheel's outer edge shrank. The spokes loosened in the center hub, and the iron band around the rim began to slip. A wheel could look serviceable in camp and start breaking apart on side ground the next day. As the iron tire loosened, the entire wheel lost the compression that held spokes, hub, and rim together. The first defense was inspection. At the earliest sign of looseness, travelers drove pairs of wooden wedges or pieces of hoop iron into opposite sides. Another temporary remedy was to remove the wheel at camp and sink it in water overnight. The wood absorbed moisture and swelled, tightening the assembly beneath the iron tire. If the tire came off, rawhide or rope could bind it in place long enough to reach camp or a traveling forge. None of this restored a badly built wheel forever. Repeated soaking eventually stopped working, and the tire had to be reset. But the settlers who checked wheels every evening could turn a coming disaster into a night's repair. The repair began with noticing movement before it became a missing tire or shattered spokes. Maintenance was not separate from travel. It was what allowed travel to continue. A loose wheel could often be saved. A shattered wheel was different. Now the family faced the question every self-reliant traveler eventually meets. When the proper tool or replacement does not exist, can the remaining pieces be arranged into something that still moves? The final 4 skills answer that question with poles, ropes, stakes, hides, and the wagon itself. Number 4. Dragging a wagon after a wheel broke. A broken rear wheel could strand thousands of pounds of food, clothing, tools, and shelter. The nearest wheelwright might be hundreds of miles away, and abandoning the wagon might mean abandoning the family's seed, tools, bedding, or food. Marcy's field repair turned the damaged wagon into a crude sled without dismantling the whole vehicle. The broken wheel came off. A stout pole 3 or 4 inches thick was placed beneath the end of the axle. Its forward end rose above the good front wheel and was lashed firmly to the wagon. 6 or 8 foot of pole extended behind the axle and dragged on the ground. Pole held the axle near its normal weight while taking the place of the missing wheel. The load had to be reduced because the dragging pole created heavy resistance. A front wheel failure required an even more complicated rearrangement. Move the rear wheels to the front axle, transfer the surviving front wheel to the rear, then use the pole on the remaining side. It was slow, rough, and inelegant. The dragging pole wore against the earth and forced the team to pull harder, so the family shifted as much weight as possible into other wagons before moving. It also carried the wagon to a repair camp instead of leaving a family's supplies beside the road. Number 3. Lowering a wagon down a mountain. Going uphill punished the team. Going downhill could kill it. A loaded wagon on a steep grade wanted to accelerate until it struck the oxen or pushed them off the trail. The animals pulling the wagon were suddenly expected to become its brakes, while the load pressed against their harnesses from behind. On an abrupt descent, travelers locked one wheel so it skidded rather than rolled. On a greater slope, both rear wheels were locked. For more friction, the lock chains were lengthened so part of the chain dragged directly beneath the wheels. If the wagon had no lock chains, front and rear wheels on one side could be tied together with rope. On slopes approaching the limits of a wagon road, men fastened ropes to the rear axle and held back as the vehicle descended. NPS interpretation at Windless Hill still points to ruts made by wagons sliding downhill with locked wheels. The skill demanded coordination. The driver controlled the team, men controlled the ropes, and the locked wheels consumed speed through friction. One weak knot or mistimed release could send the household downhill faster than the animals could run. The technique turned rope and friction into a braking system long before a wagon had anything resembling a mechanical brake. Number 2. Probing a quicksand ford. A broad, shallow river could be more dangerous than a narrow, deep one. Beneath calm water, quicksand shifted with the current. A wagon that stopped could sink to the hubs. A frightened mule might lie down in the sand and refuse to rise, leaving people to pull it free with ropes before the current and sand buried it farther. Before the first team entered, one capable person crossed on foot. He tested the bottom with his feet and long, sharp sticks. If people were walking with the train, they crossed first because their steps packed the sand and strengthened the track. The animals were watered before entering so they would not stop to drink. Then horses, mules, and wagons moved steadily without halting. Marcy also advised angling a ford downstream when possible, allowing the current to help carry the wagon toward the exit rather than fighting it head-on. The river was crossed first with judgment, and only then with the weight of the household. Even the exit mattered. If the far bank was soft, brush and earth could be thrown in to create footing before the teams arrived. Number 1. Turning the wagon into a ferry. When the river rose above fording depth, the wagon that could not roll through the water became the material for a boat. Settlers first stretched a rope across the stream. Then they removed a wagon bed and filled it with tightly stopped empty water casks. Turned bottom up and tied to the crossing rope, the box became a ferry for people and baggage. The rope extended across the water and back again so men on either bank could pull the improvised boat in both directions. Without enough casks, the wagon bed could be wrapped in a tent fly, pollen, or wagon cover and floated right side up. Cotton cloth soon swelled and leaked less. Once the family and supplies were over, the wagon running gear could be secured and pulled across by ropes attached front and rear. Marcy wrote that he had moved a large train this way across a rapid stream 15 feet deep. Willow rods were bent into a low, broad frame, lashed together and covered with green or soaked hides. The seams were sealed with tallow and pitch. This bull boat could carry people and supplies until the hides became waterlogged. Marcy estimated that 2 men could build a 3-hide version in 2 days and make it large enough to carry 10 men. These 12 skills came from a manual published under the authority of the War Department in 1859. Marcy gathered the working knowledge of soldiers, teamsters, mule packers, guides, indigenous travelers, Mexican muleteers, and generations of people who had already learned what the plains demanded. None of these methods required a factory-made rescue device, but everyone required someone who had seen the problem before, remembered the methods, and acted before panic took over. The bell mare was not folklore. The rawhide shoe was not decoration. The sticks and the quicksand and the locked wheels on a mountain grade were small pieces of judgment standing between a family and a disaster. Which of these skills would you most want to know before trusting your household to a wagon road across the continent? The settlers who made it west did not survive because nothing broke. They survived because they knew what to do when it did. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'll see you in the next one.